Smart people don't expect to struggle with money. They grow up believing that intelligence, education, and the ability to think deeply will protect them from bad decisions. So when money becomes a source of stress, confusion, or regret, it feels especially unsettling, almost embarrassing, as if something has gone wrong that shouldn't have. And yet, when you look closely, many of the people who feel the most anxious, conflicted, or stuck around money are not careless or uninformed. They are thoughtful, analytical, and highly aware of risk. And this awareness is precisely where the problem begins. Intelligence changes how people relate to uncertainty because smart minds are very good at seeing multiple outcomes at once. They can imagine best-case scenarios, worst-case scenarios, and every possibility in between. And while this ability is powerful in theory, it becomes heavy in practice when decisions must be made without complete information. Money decisions rarely arrive with clarity or certainty. They arrive with pressure, emotion, and incomplete data. And for intelligent people, this creates friction because their strength lies in thinking things through, not in acting while things are still unclear. Over time, this friction turns into hesitation, overanalysis, and delayed action. Not because smart people don't know what to do, but because they are deeply uncomfortable with the idea of being wrong. Being wrong doesn't just feel like a mistake to them. It feels like a threat to their identity, because they are used to being the one who understands, anticipates, and figures things out. So instead of making decisions, they keep refining them, researching more, waiting for better conditions, or telling themselves that patience is wisdom, even when patience is actually fear in disguise. Intelligence then becomes a tool not for clarity, but for justification, helping fear sound rational, measured, and responsible. This is why smart people can talk themselves out of opportunities that would have served them well. They don't panic, they reason. They construct convincing arguments about timing, risk, and caution. And those arguments feel solid enough to delay action indefinitely. Another layer of this problem is that smart people tend to personalize outcomes. When something goes wrong financially, they don't just see a bad decision, they see a personal failure, proof that they should have known better. And this creates a deep aversion to future mistakes. The fear of regret becomes stronger than the desire for progress, so choices start to feel heavy, emotionally loaded, and dangerous, even when the actual risk is manageable. This is also why many intelligent people understand money concepts well, but struggle to apply them consistently. Understanding increases awareness of downside, but awareness without emotional regulation amplifies anxiety rather than confidence. The mind becomes a warning system, constantly scanning for what could go wrong, what might be overlooked, what could backfire later. And living inside that mental environment makes action feel irresponsible, even when inaction carries its own cost. Intelligence also trains people to expect correct answers, clear rules, and logical consistency, because that's how intelligence is rewarded in school and professional life. But money doesn't operate in a world of right answers. It operates in probabilities, trade-offs, and imperfect timing. And when smart people bring exam-style thinking into a probabilistic world, they freeze, waiting for certainty that never arrives. Meanwhile, people with less information but more tolerance for uncertainty move forward, adjust along the way, and quietly outperform those who are still deciding. This creates a painful illusion that intelligence is a disadvantage, when in reality the disadvantage is not intelligence itself, but the emotional weight that comes with it. Smart people see more, think more, and anticipate more, but without learning how to act while still feeling unsure, that same intelligence becomes a source of paralysis. And until this dynamic is understood, many capable people will continue blaming themselves, wondering why they know so much, yet feel so stuck, not realizing that the problem is not a lack of understanding, but a relationship with uncertainty that intelligence alone cannot solve. Money does not reward the people who think the most. It rewards the people who can think clearly and still move forward, even when the picture is incomplete. And that is a skill very few smart people are ever taught. What makes this pattern even more complicated is that smart people are rarely impulsive with money. They don't rush into decisions blindly. They hesitate, evaluate, and weigh consequences carefully. And on the surface, this looks like wisdom. But beneath it often sits something more subtle, the need to eliminate discomfort before acting. Overthinking is not really about thinking too much. It is about trying to think away uncertainty, and money never allows that. Intelligent minds are trained to believe that if they analyze deeply enough, research long enough, and consider enough angles, clarity will eventually arrive. Yet financial clarity rarely arrives all at once. It emerges after decisions are made, not before. And this creates a trap where smart people wait for a feeling that can only be earned through action. This is how analysis paralysis forms, not as laziness or indecision, but as an attempt to protect oneself from regret. Smart people are acutely aware of opportunity cost. They can clearly see how one decision closes other doors, how timing matters, how outcomes can diverge dramatically, and this awareness makes every choice feel consequential, heavy, and irreversible, even when most money decisions are adjustable over time. Instead of seeing decisions as experiments, they see them as verdicts, and verdicts are terrifying when you believe you should always choose correctly. This is why smart people often delay investing, delay changing careers, delay charging more, or delay committing to a path, because waiting feels safer than choosing wrong, even though waiting is itself a choice with long-term consequences. Another quiet factor is that intelligent people tend to replay decisions mentally, imagining future regret in vivid detail. They picture themselves looking back and thinking, "I should have known better." And that imagined future shame is often enough to stop them from acting in the present. Fear of embarrassment, especially internal embarrassment, is far more powerful than fear of loss. And smart people are particularly sensitive to it because their identity is tied to being thoughtful and competent. Overthinking also feeds a false sense of control. The mind feels busy, productive, and responsible while analyzing, which creates the illusion of progress. But progress without movement is comforting rather than transformative. Research replaces risk, planning replaces exposure, and thinking replaces doing. And this pattern can continue for years while life quietly moves on. Another reason analysis paralysis hits smart people harder is that they often confuse complexity with depth. They assume that if a decision feels complex, it must require more thought, when in reality, many financial decisions are simple but emotionally uncomfortable, and the discomfort is misinterpreted as a need for more information. Intelligence then becomes a way to avoid sitting with uncertainty, not a way to navigate it. This is especially visible in high-stakes moments, investing, entrepreneurship, pricing, or career shifts, where smart people keep waiting for a sign that confirms safety, while people who accept uncertainty move forward with imperfect confidence. Over time, this creates an imbalance. Those who act learn faster, adjust faster, and compound experience, while those who wait accumulate knowledge without momentum. And the most painful part is that smart people are often aware of this pattern. They can explain it intellectually, they know they are overthinking, yet awareness alone doesn't dissolve fear. It often intensifies it because now they feel stuck and self-critical. This self-criticism deepens paralysis, making each decision feel like a test of character rather than a step in a process. Money decisions were never meant to carry that much emotional weight. But intelligence amplifies the weight by attaching identity, self-worth, and future judgment to every choice, until smart people learn to reframe decisions as reversible, adaptive, and part of a longer arc rather than final statements about who they are. Overthinking will continue to masquerade as caution while quietly stealing time, opportunity, and peace. Clarity does not precede action in financial life, it follows it. And until that truth is embodied rather than understood intellectually, the smartest minds will keep mistaking hesitation for wisdom and safety for stagnation. There's another layer beneath overthinking that quietly drives bad money decisions among smart people, and it has to do with how they experience risk emotionally rather than intellectually. Intelligent people often understand risk very well on paper. They can calculate probabilities, weigh downside scenarios, and model outcomes. Yet emotionally, they tend to experience risk as something far more personal and threatening than it actually is. This happens because smart people don't just imagine outcomes, they simulate them vividly. They picture the embarrassment of loss, the self-judgment of being wrong, the imagined conversations where they explain their mistake, and this emotional rehearsal makes the risk feel real before it ever occurs. As a result, the nervous system reacts as if danger is already present, tightening the body and narrowing perception, even though nothing has actually happened yet. In this state, the mind's goal subtly shifts from making a good decision to avoiding emotional pain. And once that shift happens, logic becomes a servant of fear rather than clarity. Smart people then start prioritizing decisions that preserve emotional comfort in the short term, even if those decisions are costly in the long term. They avoid investments that feel volatile, opportunities that involve visibility, and paths that expose them to judgment, not because these options are irrational, but because they threaten the image they hold of themselves as competent and careful. This is why many intelligent people default to choices that feel respectable rather than effective, safe rather than expansive, and familiar rather than growth-oriented. Another hidden factor is loss aversion, amplified by intelligence. Smart people are very good at imagining what could be lost, and losses feel heavier than gains because losses challenge identity. They feel like evidence of poor judgment. So even when the potential upside is meaningful, the imagined downside dominates attention, making the decision feel skewed toward danger. Over time, this creates a pattern where smart people consistently under-risk, under-invest, and under-commit, while telling themselves they are simply being prudent. But prudence without proportion becomes fear dressed up as responsibility. What makes this pattern particularly deceptive is that it rarely looks like failure. From the outside, these choices appear reasonable, conservative, even wise, but internally they accumulate frustration, self-doubt, and a sense of stagnation. Another dimension of this issue is that smart people often rely heavily on internal validation. They want to feel confident before they act. Yet confidence with money rarely comes before action. It emerges after repeated exposure to uncertainty and recovery. Without that exposure, confidence remains theoretical, and theoretical confidence collapses under real pressure. This creates a paradox where intelligent people know what they should do, but don't trust themselves enough to do it, because trust is built through experience, not understanding. Emotional safety then becomes the primary decision filter, and once emotional safety is prioritized above all else, money decisions shrink to what feels least threatening, rather than what is most aligned. Over time, this pattern shapes an entire financial life built around avoidance, not because smart people are incapable of courage, but because their intelligence keeps convincing them that courage is unnecessary or premature. And the cost of this avoidance is rarely immediate, which makes it harder to notice. It shows up years later as regret, missed compounding, and the quiet realization that playing it safe didn't actually produce peace. Until smart people learn to separate emotional discomfort from actual danger and accept that unease is often the price of progress rather than a signal to stop, they will continue making decisions that protect their feelings at the expense of their future. Intelligence alone cannot solve this, because the problem is not a lack of reasoning, it is a lack of emotional exposure, and money rewards those who are willing to feel uncertain without letting that uncertainty dictate their choices. One of the most damaging ways intelligence backfires in money decisions is through identity, because smart people don't just make choices, they identify with them. For many intelligent individuals, being smart is not just a trait, it's a core part of who they believe they are. And that belief quietly raises the stakes of every financial decision they face. When money choices become tied to identity, being wrong no longer feels like a normal part of learning. It feels like evidence that the identity itself is fragile. This is why smart people often seek perfect decisions, not because perfection exists, but because imperfection threatens how they see themselves. Money becomes a stage where intelligence is tested, judged, and remembered, and that makes even small decisions feel emotionally charged. Instead of asking, "Is this direction useful?" the mind asks, "What does this decision say about me?" And that shift changes everything. People begin choosing options that preserve their self-image rather than those that serve long-term growth. They avoid visible risks because failure would feel public, humiliating, or defining, even if no one else is actually watching. This is why smart people often stay in roles, lifestyles, or financial structures that no longer fit them, not because they don't see the misalignment, but because changing direction would require admitting that their earlier decisions were imperfect. And for someone who has spent a lifetime being rewarded for being right, admitting imperfection feels destabilizing. Another quiet trap is that intelligent people often build their confidence through competence, not through resilience. They trust themselves when things go according to plan, but when reality deviates, that confidence collapses quickly. Money rarely behaves predictably, so confidence tied to correctness becomes brittle. When things don't work out as expected, smart people often respond with self-criticism rather than adjustment, asking, "What did I miss?" instead of "What can I adapt?" And that self-criticism deepens hesitation around future decisions. This creates a cycle where identity pressure increases emotional weight increases fear, and fear leads to avoidance or overly conservative choices. Another aspect of identity-driven decision-making is the need to appear rational at all times. Smart people are uncomfortable making decisions that they can't fully justify, even if those decisions are intuitively right for them. They want reasons that sound intelligent, defensible, and coherent, especially to themselves. This pushes them toward decisions that can be explained logically, not necessarily those that align with their values, energy, or long-term vision. Over time, this disconnect creates dissatisfaction because life starts being optimized for explanation rather than experience. Money decisions become more about maintaining an image of intelligence than building a life that feels meaningful and expansive. And the irony is that this identity protection slowly erodes real confidence, because confidence doesn't come from being right all the time. It comes from knowing you can recover when you're wrong. Without recovery experiences, intelligence becomes rigid rather than adaptive. The smartest people then become the most internally constrained, constantly managing how they appear to themselves, guarding their identity against risk. Until this identity link is softened, money decisions will continue to feel heavy and high stakes, because every choice will feel like a referendum on self-worth. True financial growth for smart people begins when decisions stop being tests of intelligence and start being experiments in learning. When identity loosens its grip, mistakes lose their power, flexibility returns, and money decisions become lighter, clearer, and far more effective. Not because intelligence disappeared, but because it stopped carrying the impossible burden of needing to be right. One of the most subtle ways intelligence sabotages money decisions is through an overdeveloped sense of caution that slowly turns into self-restraint. And because this restraint feels responsible, it often goes unquestioned for years. Smart people are trained early to associate carefulness with maturity, discipline, and moral correctness. So over time, caution becomes more than a strategy. It becomes a virtue, something that signals being sensible, grounded, and trustworthy. But money does not reward virtue in isolation. It rewards calibration. And when caution stops being calibrated to present reality and instead becomes an automatic response, it quietly limits growth. Intelligent people are extremely skilled at identifying what could go wrong. They can foresee downsides with precision, imagine second and third order consequences, and anticipate regret before it happens. Yet far fewer are trained to weigh opportunity cost with the same emotional seriousness. As a result, loss avoidance dominates decision-making, even when the actual risk is modest and reversible. This is why smart people often undercharge for their work, stay in roles that no longer stretch them, delay investing in themselves, or choose financial paths that feel respectable rather than expansive. The internal language sounds mature. Phrases like, "I don't want to get ahead of myself, I should be patient," or "I'd rather be safe than sorry." But what's rarely examined is whether patience is still strategic, or whether it has quietly become fear with good manners. Another layer of this pattern is that intelligent people often wait for external signals of readiness before acting. Degrees, years of experience, validation from authority, or guarantees that things will work out. They believe that when the time is right, confidence will arrive naturally, not realizing that confidence in money decisions is usually a byproduct of exposure, not preparation. By waiting for certainty, they delay the very experiences that would have trained their judgment, while others, with less information but greater tolerance for uncertainty, move forward, make imperfect decisions, and refine their approach in real time. Over years, this difference compounds into income and opportunity gaps that feel baffling because the smarter person can clearly articulate what should be done but feels emotionally blocked from doing it. Another overlooked issue is that smart people often equate slowness with depth, assuming that longer deliberation produces better outcomes, when in reality, many money decisions are time-sensitive and benefit from early action and fast feedback. Delayed decisions delay learning, and delayed learning slows growth, but because delay feels thoughtful, its cost remains invisible. Intelligence then creates a false sense of productivity. Planning, researching, and optimizing feel like progress, even when nothing is actually changing. This keeps people psychologically busy while materially stagnant. There is also a strong emotional component of guilt that surfaces here, especially among intelligent people who were praised for humility, restraint, or being low maintenance. Wanting more money, charging more, or taking up more financial space can feel morally uncomfortable, as if ambition needs justification. This guilt quietly reinforces conservative choices and caps income below potential, all while being framed as ethics or realism. Over time, this creates internal conflict because the desire for growth doesn't disappear, it just gets suppressed. And suppressed desire often turns into frustration, envy, or quiet resentment toward those who seem to move faster or take bigger risks. Another compounding factor is that smart people often overestimate the permanence of mistakes. They assume that a wrong move will define them or set them back irreversibly, when in reality, most financial decisions are adjustable, recoverable, and informative. This exaggerated sense of permanence makes every choice feel heavier than it actually is, pushing people toward maintaining the status quo, even when the status quo no longer serves them. And because these choices look responsible from the outside, they are rarely challenged by others, reinforcing the belief that staying small is wise. Over time, however, this restraint erodes confidence rather than protecting it, because confidence grows from testing oneself, not from avoiding error. The mind begins interpreting lack of progress as evidence of limitation rather than miscalibration, deepening self-doubt and reinforcing fear-based caution. Until intelligent people learn to regularly reassess their level of caution, to separate genuine risk from familiar fear, and to treat money decisions as evolving experiments rather than moral statements, intelligence will continue to work against them. Growth does not require abandoning carefulness. It requires retraining it so that caution becomes a flexible tool instead of a fixed identity. And when that shift happens, smart people stop making decisions that merely preserve comfort and start making decisions that allow their lives to expand in proportion to their capability. So another hidden reason smart people struggle with money decisions is that they place too much faith in future clarity and underestimate the cost of waiting, believing that with enough time, information, or maturity, the right answer will reveal itself. This belief feels reasonable, even wise, because intelligence has taught them that insight improves with reflection. But in financial life, waiting rarely produces clarity. It usually produces a shifting landscape where the decision changes shape, opportunities decay, and costs quietly rise. Smart people often tell themselves they are not avoiding action. They are simply waiting for better conditions. But better conditions are rarely neutral. They favor those who are already in motion. While intelligent minds are waiting to feel ready, markets move, careers evolve, prices rise, skills depreciate, and social capital compounds elsewhere. And none of this feels dramatic day to day, which is why it goes unnoticed. The danger is not that smart people make reckless decisions, it is that they outsource momentum to the future, assuming they will act decisively later, when in reality, the psychological barrier rarely disappears on its own. Another layer beneath this pattern is that intelligent people are often rewarded for foresight, so they become deeply oriented toward imagining future outcomes rather than engaging fully with present action. They spend mental energy optimizing for distant scenarios while neglecting the small moves that create leverage now. This creates a strange imbalance where the future is heavily rehearsed, but the present is underutilized. Money, however, compounds through presence, through early action, through learning, while conditions are imperfect. When smart people delay, they lose not just time, but calibration, because judgment sharpens through feedback, not contemplation. Without feedback, confidence remains abstract, and abstract confidence collapses under real pressure. Another emotional factor here is that smart people often believe that decisive action should feel calm and certain, and when it doesn't, they assume something is wrong. But decisive action in financial life often feels uncomfortable, tense, and unresolved, especially early on. Mistaking discomfort for danger causes intelligent people to retreat just as growth would have begun. There is also a subtle perfectionism at work, where smart people feel that once they commit to a decision, they should commit fully and correctly. So they hesitate to begin unless they can see the entire path ahead. This all-or-nothing thinking makes starting feel overwhelming, even when small steps would be sufficient. Meanwhile, people who are comfortable with partial commitment take incremental action, learn quickly, and adjust direction without drama. Over time, this creates a widening gap in experience, not intelligence. Another quiet cost of waiting is identity stagnation. Smart people often continue to see themselves as preparing long after preparation is complete, because acting would require updating how they see themselves, from observer to participant, from thinker to builder. That shift feels risky because it exposes them to visible outcomes, both good and bad. Remaining in preparation preserves a sense of potential, while acting introduces the possibility of limitation, and many intelligent people unconsciously choose potential over progress. The irony is that unexpressed potential eventually turns into frustration, because what is not lived becomes a source of self-judgment. Over time, smart people begin to feel behind, not because they lack ability, but because they postponed engagement with reality. The world does not reward those who wait for clarity. It rewards those who generate clarity through action. Until intelligent people accept that uncertainty is not a problem to be solved before acting, but a condition to be carried while acting, they will continue making money decisions that feel prudent in the moment but costly in hindsight. True wisdom with money is not about choosing perfectly. It is about choosing early enough to learn, adjust, and compound. And that lesson is one that intelligence alone cannot teach. It must be lived. Another way intelligence quietly undermines money decisions is through an over-reliance on internal reasoning and a simultaneous underuse of external feedback, because smart people tend to trust their own thinking more than most. When you've been rewarded for insight, analysis, and mental sharpness, it's natural to assume that the best answers will come from thinking harder rather than engaging with the world. But money is not a purely internal problem. It is an interactive one, shaped by markets, people, timing, and changing conditions. And when decisions are made in isolation, even brilliant reasoning can drift away from reality. Smart people often simulate outcomes in their heads instead of testing them in the world, believing that a well-reasoned plan is safer than a small real-world experiment. Yet simulations lack friction, emotion, and unpredictability, which are exactly the elements that reveal whether a decision actually works. This leads to a pattern where intelligent people feel informed but underexposed, confident in theory but uncertain in practice. Another hidden factor is that smart people often mistake coherence for truth. If a decision makes sense logically and fits neatly into a mental model, it feels right, even if the model itself is incomplete or outdated. Money environments change faster than mental models, and when feedback is delayed or ignored, those models quietly decay. People then double down on reasoning instead of updating assumptions, because updating requires admitting that prior thinking may no longer apply. This is especially true when identity is involved. Smart people don't like abandoning frameworks they've invested in, so they keep refining them rather than testing new ones. There is also a social dimension to this. Intelligent people often prefer decisions that can be defended verbally, choices that sound reasonable to others, because explanation feels safer than exposure. They gravitate toward paths that can be justified with logic and precedent, even when those paths no longer offer meaningful upside. This is why many smart people choose conventional investments, conventional careers, or conventional pricing structures long after those conventions stop serving them. Another subtle cost of internalized decision-making is emotional insulation. When everything happens in the head, emotions don't get processed through experience, they accumulate. Fear, doubt, and anticipation build without release, making future decisions feel heavier and heavier. External action, even imperfect action, metabolizes emotion. It turns fear into information, uncertainty into data, and doubt into learning. Without that release, intelligent people carry unresolved emotional load that clouds judgment. Over time, this leads to decision fatigue, where even small money choices feel draining, not because they are complex, but because they are carrying the weight of all the untested thoughts behind them. Another aspect of this dynamic is that smart people often seek optimization before validation. They want to perfect a strategy before seeing if it works at all. But money rewards validation first, proof that something functions, even in a rough form, and optimization later. By reversing this order, intelligent people delay feedback and increase emotional investment, making change harder when reality contradicts the plan. This pattern shows up in careers, investing, entrepreneurship, and even personal finance habits, where people wait until something is ready instead of letting readiness emerge through use. Over time, reliance on internal reasoning creates fragility, because when reality finally pushes back, the gap between expectation and outcome feels shocking. Those who engage early experience smaller corrections and adapt smoothly, while those who wait experience larger dissonance and stronger emotional reactions. Intelligence then turns against itself, not because it's flawed, but because it's operating in a closed loop. Money decisions thrive in open systems, where thinking and action inform each other continuously. Until smart people rebalance this relationship, learning to trust feedback as much as thought, to test as much as they plan, and to adjust as much as they analyze, they will continue making decisions that feel sound internally, but perform poorly externally. The shift is not about thinking less, it's about thinking with reality rather than about it. And when that shift happens, intelligence stops being a barrier and starts becoming the amplifier it was always meant to be. One of the most invisible reasons smart people make poor money decisions is that they confuse emotional neutrality with correctness, believing that a good decision should feel calm, stable, and reassuring at the moment it's made. Intelligent people are often uncomfortable acting while emotionally unsettled, so they unconsciously wait for decisions to feel right before committing, not realizing that many of the best financial decisions feel unsettling, precisely because they challenge existing identity, habits, and assumptions. Growth-oriented choices often disrupt internal equilibrium before they create external benefit, and when smart people interpret that disruption as a warning sign, they retreat. This creates a pattern where emotionally comfortable decisions are favored over strategically sound ones. The problem is that emotional comfort is often aligned with familiarity, not progress. Familiarity feels safe because it's predictable, even when it's limiting. Smart people are especially sensitive to internal signals. They listen closely to their thoughts and feelings, but without training in emotional interpretation, they mistake anxiety for danger and uncertainty for error. As a result, they reject paths that would stretch them financially, not because those paths are flawed, but because those paths activate discomfort. Another layer here is that intelligent people tend to overvalue coherence in the present moment. They want a decision to make sense now, emotionally and logically, without considering that coherence often emerges later after commitment and action. Money decisions rarely feel coherent at the start. They feel fragmented, unresolved, and ambiguous, and expecting emotional clarity up front sets an impossible standard. This is why smart people often say things like, "I don't feel ready yet," or "something feels off," when in reality, what feels off is the mismatch between growth and the nervous system's desire for stability. There is also a tendency among intelligent people to treat emotional discomfort as a personal flaw, assuming that if they were wiser or more experienced, they wouldn't feel so unsettled. This self-judgment adds another layer of pressure, making decisions feel even heavier. Instead of recognizing discomfort as a normal companion of expansion, they interpret it as evidence of misalignment. Over time, this trains the mind to avoid situations that challenge emotional equilibrium, which quietly narrows financial possibility. Another hidden consequence of seeking emotional neutrality is delayed adaptation. People who act despite discomfort gain experience quickly, recalibrate expectations, and stabilize emotionally through exposure, while those who wait for calm never give their nervous system the chance to learn that uncertainty is survivable. This keeps fear intact and reinforces the belief that safety must precede action rather than follow it. Intelligent people also tend to intellectualize their emotions, analyzing why they feel uneasy instead of allowing the feeling to exist while moving forward. This turns discomfort into another problem to solve, further delaying action. Money decisions then become layered with emotional management, cognitive processing, and self-evaluation, making even simple choices feel exhausting. Over time, this creates an association between money and emotional labor, which increases avoidance and reduces decisiveness. The irony is that emotional neutrality rarely arrives on its own. It is usually the result of having acted, adjusted, and seen that the world didn't collapse. Calm follows commitment, not the other way around. Until smart people stop demanding emotional reassurance before moving and start allowing emotional turbulence as part of the process, they will continue mistaking comfort for correctness. The most effective money decisions often feel uncomfortable first and obvious later, and intelligence becomes truly useful only when it learns to tolerate that sequence. When emotional neutrality is no longer the gatekeeper for action, decisions regain momentum, fear loses authority, and smart people finally begin using their intelligence in service of growth rather than self-protection. Another quiet force shaping poor money decisions among smart people is the way they relate to responsibility, because intelligence often comes paired with a strong sense of duty, and duty can easily turn into overcontrol. Smart people tend to feel responsible not just for their own outcomes, but for preventing future problems, protecting stability, and avoiding disruption for themselves and others. This creates a constant background pressure to manage risk perfectly, and when money is involved, that pressure intensifies. Decisions stop being about opportunity and start being about damage prevention. The mind becomes focused on not messing things up, not losing ground, not becoming a cautionary tale, and this mindset subtly narrows the range of acceptable choices. Intelligent people then choose paths that minimize visible downside rather than those that maximize long-term value. Another layer of this is that smart people often carry responsibility forward from earlier phases of life where being careful was genuinely necessary. They learned to survive by anticipating problems, staying alert, and being dependable. And those skills worked, so they kept them. But when circumstances improve, the nervous system doesn't automatically update. Responsibility stays inflated even when risk has decreased. Money decisions are still approached as if one mistake could undo everything, even when that's no longer true. This mismatch between present reality and past conditioning leads to excessive caution, overplanning, and emotional rigidity. There is also a moral dimension here. Many intelligent people associate responsibility with goodness and growth with selfishness. Wanting more, charging more, or prioritizing personal upside can feel uncomfortable, as if it comes at the expense of being ethical or grounded. This moral framing pushes smart people toward choices that feel respectable rather than effective. They keep themselves small in the name of responsibility, not realizing that responsibility without expansion eventually becomes a form of self-neglect. Another hidden cost is that over-responsibility reduces adaptability. When people feel they must get everything right, they become less willing to experiment, adjust, or pivot. Mistakes feel unacceptable, so learning slows. Money environments, however, reward those who can recalibrate quickly, not those who maintain perfect control. Over time, this gap widens. People who allow themselves to make small mistakes gain resilience and insight, while those who avoid mistakes accumulate fragility. Another psychological layer is the fear of becoming dependent on money outcomes. Smart people often worry that if they allow money to matter too much, they'll lose balance or values, so they keep emotional distance. But emotional distance can turn into disengagement, where decisions are made half-heartedly, without conviction or commitment. Money then feels heavy and unrewarding, reinforcing the belief that it's safer to stay conservative. There's also a tendency among intelligent people to overestimate the responsibility of choice and underestimate the responsibility of inaction. Not choosing feels neutral, but it carries consequences just as real as active decisions. Years pass, compounding is missed, skills stagnate, and optionality narrows, all without a single dramatic failure. This makes the cost of responsibility hard to see, because it's slow and silent. Until smart people learn to redefine responsibility as responsiveness rather than control, as the ability to adjust rather than the need to prevent all error, they will continue making decisions that feel safe but leave them underfulfilled. True responsibility with money is not about never making mistakes. It's about being able to recover, learn, and continue moving. When responsibility is reframed this way, intelligence stops trying to manage life perfectly and starts engaging with it fully. And money decisions regain flexibility, energy, and forward momentum. As these patterns repeat over years, something far more damaging than a few bad money choices begins to take shape. Smart people slowly lose trust in their own judgment, even though from the outside they still appear capable, informed, and responsible. This loss of self-trust doesn't arrive suddenly. It forms quietly through a long series of moments where action was postponed, decisions were softened, or opportunities were talked down rather than tested. Each time a smart person hesitates, waits for clarity, or chooses the safest possible option, the mind stores that experience as evidence that acting is dangerous and certainty is required. Over time, this creates an internal narrative that says, "I can't move unless I'm sure." And because certainty rarely arrives in financial life, movement slows to a crawl. What makes this especially painful for intelligent people is that they can often see what needs to be done, yet feel unable to do it without intense internal conflict. This gap between knowing and acting creates cognitive strain, and strain erodes confidence. Instead of trusting themselves to respond to outcomes, smart people begin outsourcing confidence to external systems. Rigid rules, expert opinions, and formulas, believing safety lives somewhere outside their own judgment. They follow advice even when it no longer fits their reality, because deviating would require trusting themselves again, and that feels risky. Intelligence fuels this behavior by providing endless rational justifications for deference, precedent, and caution, all while avoiding the discomfort of personal accountability. Another layer of this erosion is that intelligent people often confuse doubt with depth, because questioning oneself feels thoughtful, mature, and responsible. Over time, self-doubt becomes habitual rather than situational. It no longer signals that something needs attention. It becomes the default background state. Decisions then feel heavier, not because they are complex, but because the mind no longer trusts itself to handle the consequences. Money choices start requiring enormous emotional energy, internal debate, and reassurance, which makes even small decisions exhausting. This is why many smart people feel drained by money, not because they lack resources, but because every choice carries the weight of identity, future regret, and self-evaluation. There is also a quiet shame woven into this experience, because smart people believe they should be decisive, they should know better, and when they don't act, they interpret hesitation as a personal flaw. That shame further weakens confidence, creating a loop where hesitation feeds self-criticism, and self-criticism feeds more hesitation. Another consequence of lost self-trust is rigidity. When people stop trusting their judgment, they cling to plans instead of principles. Plans feel safer because they offer structure and predictability, but financial life is dynamic, and rigid plans break when reality shifts. Principles allow flexibility, but flexibility requires confidence in one's ability to adapt. Without that confidence, smart people feel disoriented when circumstances change, even if they understand intellectually what should be done. Money then starts feeling fragile because safety depends on conditions staying exactly as expected. Any deviation triggers anxiety. Over time, this rigidity turns intelligence inward, transforming it from a tool for navigation into a tool for self-surveillance. The mind constantly monitors for mistakes, misjudgments, and potential regret, leaving little room for curiosity or growth. The irony is that good money decisions are rarely born from certainty. They are born from self-trust combined with responsiveness. Trusting yourself does not mean believing you will always be right. It means believing you can recover, learn, and continue even when you're wrong. Until intelligent people rebuild that trust, they will keep choosing paths that minimize exposure rather than maximize learning. And without learning, intelligence stagnates. Money becomes something to manage defensively instead of something to engage with creatively. Rebuilding self-trust requires something deeply uncomfortable for smart people: acting before feeling fully ready, choosing before feeling calm, and allowing real-world outcomes to provide feedback instead of self-judgment. When self-trust begins to return, decisions regain lightness, momentum returns, and intelligence finally resumes its proper role, not as a shield against uncertainty, but as a companion that helps navigate it. When you're ready, say Chapter 11, and I'll continue toward integration, resolution, and the final insight arc. By this point, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Smart people don't fail with money because they lack intelligence. They struggle because their intelligence is asked to do a job it was never designed to do: create emotional safety in an uncertain world. When intelligence is used as a shield against discomfort, it turns inward and becomes protective rather than generative. Over years, this protection hardens into habits: avoiding exposure, choosing predictability, minimizing risk, and preferring explanations over experiences. And while each choice feels reasonable in isolation, together they form a life that is intellectually rich but financially constrained. What's most striking is how invisible this process feels while it's happening. Smart people rarely wake up one day and think they're playing it too safe. Instead, they feel responsible, measured, and mature, even as they quietly give up leverage, momentum, and optionality. Money decisions become less about creating possibility and more about preserving equilibrium. This is why many intelligent people reach a point where they feel strangely bored, restless, or underutilized, even though nothing is technically wrong. The life they built makes sense, but it doesn't feel alive. Another layer of this dynamic is that smart people often intellectualize dissatisfaction instead of responding to it. When something feels off financially, they analyze why they feel that way, rather than changing the conditions producing the feeling. They read more, think more, and plan more, believing insight will dissolve discomfort. But dissatisfaction is not a thinking problem. It's a signal that the current configuration no longer fits. Without action, insight becomes circular. Over time, this creates a sense of being stuck inside one's own mind, watching life from the sidelines while waiting for clarity or permission to re-engage. There is also a subtle grief embedded in this experience, the grief of unrealized potential. Smart people are acutely aware of what they could do, which makes what they aren't doing harder to ignore. That awareness doesn't motivate them forward, it weighs them down, because moving would require confronting the possibility that they waited too long, played it too safe, or misjudged earlier decisions. Facing that truth feels painful, so avoidance continues. Another important piece here is how intelligence interacts with social norms. Smart people often learn to succeed by fitting into systems, understanding rules, and optimizing within given structures. Money growth, however, often requires stepping outside existing structures, redefining value, or tolerating misalignment with social expectations. That misalignment feels risky for people whose intelligence has been rewarded through conformity and correctness. So they stay inside lanes that feel legitimate, even when those lanes limit upside. Over time, intelligence becomes aligned with maintenance rather than creation. The mind focuses on protecting what exists rather than building what could exist. This is where the real cost shows up, not in dramatic failures, but in quiet underachievement. Smart people begin to sense that their lives are smaller than their capacity, and that realization creates tension that can't be solved with more thinking. The uncomfortable truth is that intelligence cannot substitute for courage, and insight cannot replace exposure. Money growth demands a willingness to act without full certainty, to learn through imperfect outcomes, and to tolerate emotional discomfort without retreating into analysis. Until smart people allow intelligence to serve action instead of replacing it, their decisions will continue to sound wise while producing mediocre results. The turning point arrives when intelligence is repositioned, not as the authority that must approve every move, but as a support system that helps interpret feedback after action is taken. When that shift occurs, dissatisfaction transforms into information, regret transforms into learning, and intelligence regains its creative edge. Money decisions stop being moral tests or identity threats and start becoming tools for exploration. This is where progress quietly resumes, not through dramatic changes, but through small acts of engagement that rebuild confidence one decision at a time. At some point, The most important realization for smart people is not about money at all. It's about how they've been using their intelligence as a substitute for trust, courage, and engagement with uncertainty. When you step back and look at the full picture, the issue is never that intelligent people don't know enough. It's that they've been trained to believe that knowing should remove risk, discomfort, and emotional exposure. And when it doesn't, they assume something is wrong with them or with the decision. But uncertainty is not a flaw in the system. It is the system, and money simply makes that truth impossible to ignore. The smartest shift happens when intelligence stops trying to eliminate uncertainty and instead learns how to carry it. This is where everything changes, because money decisions stop feeling like exams you can fail and start feeling like conversations with reality that evolve over time. Smart people don't need to become reckless, impulsive, or careless to make better money decisions. They need to become more forgiving of imperfection, more tolerant of discomfort, and more willing to let action teach what thinking cannot. The moment intelligence is no longer responsible for guaranteeing outcomes, it becomes free to do what it does best: notice patterns, adjust strategy, and learn from feedback. This is when confidence begins to rebuild, not as bravado or certainty, but as quiet trust in one's ability to respond. Trust doesn't mean believing you'll always choose correctly. It means believing you won't collapse if you choose imperfectly. That distinction alone removes an enormous amount of pressure from money decisions. Over time, small acts of engagement begin to compound, making a decision before feeling ready, charging a little more than feels comfortable, investing before certainty arrives, saying yes to growth before the fear quiets down. None of these moments feel dramatic, but together they rewrite the internal narrative from "I must not mess this up" to "I can handle what happens next." And when that shift takes root, intelligence stops working against you and starts working with you. Money becomes less emotionally charged, decisions feel lighter, and progress feels possible again. Not because the world became safer, but because your relationship with uncertainty became healthier. The deepest irony is that this transformation doesn't require becoming someone new. It requires allowing yourself to be fully who you already are: thoughtful, capable, adaptive, and human. Smart people often underestimate how resilient they actually are because they've spent so long avoiding situations that would prove it. When they finally allow experience to replace imagination, fear loses its grip and clarity emerges naturally through movement. This is how intelligence becomes wisdom, not through perfect foresight, but through lived understanding. And if this conversation felt uncomfortably familiar, if you saw yourself in these patterns, the overthinking, the caution, the quiet frustration of knowing more than you're using, then you're exactly the kind of person this channel is for. The Mindful Brief exists for people who don't need louder advice or faster tips, but deeper understanding of how money, mindset, and modern life actually interact. If you want to continue these calm, honest conversations at your own pace without hype or pressure, consider subscribing to the Mindful Brief. Not to change who you are, but to help you trust yourself enough to finally use what you already know.